improv out of it at least.
Exactly. All right, welcome everybody. So we wanted to talk. I've been threatening for a while to talk about animation of today versus yesterday versus the dawn of animation versus should it be done by computer, should it be done by hand, and I've never really done that. So today I got some people together to talk about that. And what's the plus or minuses of doing it both ways? So everybody who's been on my channel knows Bill Sylvie, the Dungeon Delver from Florida, not too far from the Mouse House. But Maggie, you've been on my channel, I think, once
Yes. One
uh,
other time, yes.
when I had Richard Witters and we were talking about art and different things. Um,
Absolutely.
but this particular one, I've been wanting to do for a while, because I think if you look at animated film and TV shows and whatnot, there's people have a certain expectation going in, and today's audiences, I think, are missing the point on what is possible for a company to do and what is not possible for a company to do and stay in business. Um, so I wanted to kind of talk for a few minutes about how animation evolved, um, and what that looks like from a cost structure. Okay, so if you go back far enough, and I'm going to go way back, animation when it kind of got its start looked a lot like this, right? I mean, Steamboat Willie wasn't the first; it wasn't even the first with sound, but it was the first that had sound done properly. Uh, the sound would always be off a little bit. It would be like the badly dubbed kung fu movies that we all watched on TV in the '80s. But Steamboat Willie got it right, and that was what Walt himself used to call a cartoon. And he used to refer to it as that's cartoon. Those are gags, and he wanted eventually, to do something bigger than that and to do something that was more artistic. And they kind of bet the company on this, right? Snow White, the first animated feature film.
Hmm.
Nobody thought this was going to make money. Everybody was like, "You're insane. You can't do that, right? It's nuts to even consider." But he took the risk, right? And it paid off. It paid off in droves. But one of the things I see people say online is, well, yeah, we should go back to that, and we should go back to that hand drawn only because, and it usually is centered around the AI discussion. Um, but I looked up some numbers, and Maggie and Bill, I'm not sure you've ever, anybody, too many people have ever seen these. To make Snow White, it, even then, and it's not that long of a movie, it's like 90 minutes or something, it's not terribly long. It took 250,000 hand drawings and 2 million painted animated cells.
Hmm.
That's a bunch.
That's a lot of work.
That is a lot of legwork. Yeah.
It to My guess by today's standards, if you had, I mean, and they had a building full of people whose job it was to work on this, who were artists who came in and worked 12-hour days. I mean, and it was the middle of the Great Depression, so people were working for basically like a ham sandwich, right? Because it was kind of the way it worked. Senior animators make a good money, but in betweeners, and we'll get to what that is in a minute. And the color people weren't making much at all. They were barely making enough to eat lunch, right? Um,
Hmm.
and by today's standards, you couldn't do that. So I took a shot at it, and I'm like, okay, if you were going to do that, just the 250 hand drawings alone done by master artists, you know, if you paid maybe $20 a piece, you could maybe kind of get it into the realm of reasonable production cost. But I don't know too many artists that are going to do that for $20 a shot, right? Because it's a full day's work to do some of those things, if not more. Um, so if you look at the cost of that, I'm like, how would you do that at a cost that comes in as something you're going to recoup in box office? I can't even imagine. Maggie, if somebody came to you as an artist and said, "Hey, we're going to do a 90-minute animated movie. Can you get your friends together? I need 250,000 drawings,
Hmm.
and you get
Yeah,
to make
it's
them
been
for
a
$2
nightmare.
a piece."
It's been a nightmare for me, actually. I've described it to people as, hey, you like really drawing something? Okay, draw a picture. Now multiply that by 50 million times to make a show. So it's like you can produce one thing and then over and over and over again in different ways, and keeping that consistency of a character is really tricky. And just assuming that one picture can be made and then you can make billions after that, that's such a big Herculean task that I really admire. Like the most recent one I've seen was I think The Adventures of Cuphead and Mugman.
Hmm.
The lady who did the inking for that, she did it all by hand
Wow.
for
My kids play
the
that game a
game.
lot. I actually
Yeah.
have to admit I play that game quite often too. It's
But the fact that she went through 45,000 images, inking them, and while pregnant, to try and get that show even begun, and then showing the differences between that hand animation and what AI thinks we're going to do seems to be a big gap still.
so let's before we get to the AI part, maybe you could take a minute to explain to I think I know, and Bill, you may know, I don't know. What is an in-betweener? Because that seems to be where AI messes a lot of things up. I think I understand it, but you actually work in the field, so I'll let you explain it rather than me attempt to do it and get it
Well,
wrong.
the in-betweeners are people who do the in-between shots of emotion. So you want to act like your arm is going from over here to over here. There's a bunch of shots in between there to create that motion. So it can be very jerky and have spots in between of blank or just a repeat, or it can have like the beginning to the actual throw. So it has a bunch of different movements that are so subtle that you don't notice it until it's all together.
Okay, so you have the master uh, artist up front, you have the master artist at the other
Hmm.
side, and then those in between frames are done by sort of people who are like, okay, I see what he's doing, I can kind of copy that and make it kind of. So those are the in between
Yes.
frames. Bill, does
So
that make sense to you?
yeah. So tweening, you mentioned cost, Tim, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but tweening has gone further and further east. If you if you start to talk about the 70s and 80s and particularly the 90s, um tweening has moved east. It was Japanese studios doing it for a while, and then the Japanese offloaded it on the Koreans, and then the curiously, and I thought this like blew my mind when I found this out a number of years ago. I don't know how what the political situation is like, whether or not it still allows us, but there's this little tiny section of North and South Korea. It's called a special economic zone, where they let people from North Korea do grunt work for companies in South Korea, assemble things, and so on and et cetera. And one of the things that goes on there is I, I'm gonna mess this up. I know it's Studio Acom in Korea. They have tweening done there for a number of different features, and a lot of people will say, well, look, the Japanese, look at all these anime. Now I like Japanese animation. I think a lot of it is brilliant. I'm not you know a otaku or anything like that, but I do like a lot of it. But the point that I'm making is they have an incredibly dirt cheap source of getting that done, and that is through this special economic zone. And these different studios in Korea that are doing that work. And Tim, you talked about paying poverty wages. When you're paying money to a company that is essentially the arm of a totalitarian government, they don't have to pay the people who are doing it anything. You talk about working for a ham sandwich. Those people would step over each other to work for a ham sandwich, unfortunately. But when people point and say, well, the Japanese can do this, the the Japanese have tweening factories, for lack of a better term, that knock that stuff out relatively cheaply. um and I would prefer, I mean, if the choice is computer aided animation or pure cell animation, but the pure cell animation is done under those circumstances, I think I can sleep a little better at night knowing that it's computer assisted.
So computer assisted is the key word, right? So
Right.
AI is a different world, and I'm not going to get into
Yeah.
that just yet. But computer assisted, I think, is the key word there because as an artist, Maggie, when you turn things into digital, there's art that you create that's behind you that's wonderful, and I've got original art hanging around me at home. Um, and this guy, of course, wanted original art all over the place because he was that guy. But he also almost put his company out of business 3 or 4 times trying to get to that, right? So
Hmm.
it it's interesting that you use that word, Bill, because you're a tech guy, and so am I, and Maggie, you're the artist. So let me explain what I think Bill means by that. And that's when you deal with AI, you look at, okay, create something that does this and have it move like that, and you give it all these prompts. When you with computer assisted, what you're talking about is, okay, I created it, I put it in Photoshop or whatever tool it is you're using. I can
Hmm.
then modify it in a much faster way than having to create a whole new one and do that in a way that the computer will help me with, but I can actually go back and watch that the computer, but I'm still in control.
Yes, it takes the paper flipping out of it.
Takes the paper flipping out of it. Instead of having a whole new day to produce a new one, maybe you can get 4 or 5 or 6 done in a day, or some number of them instead of just one.
Yes, it takes quite a few different ones, and also going back between what we call the onion skins, all the different layers to make sure that the in-betweens and the individual prompts match up with each other, so it looks like a motion that somebody would do, and not just a stone figure that moves across and that's it. It
Yeah.
needs the oddity of how we move, preemptive movement, and during the movement to create almost a lifelike feel about it. And AI isn't really analyzing us in the same way to be able to recreate that yet. I
So
think we scarily may get there, but uh, there's still a human element that I think we can't just rely on AI to bring to animation.
So,
No,
so you
what
hit on something that the planar part of that I wanted to show off because this was one of the things Disney brought in early in the mix, and this one just about drove his brother insane. So if you're not familiar with the company, Walt was the guy who was the creative one. Roy was the guy who had to go figure out how to pay for everything. And when they were trying to figure out how to zoom in on an image, they figured out that, oh boy, if I've got the Snow White in the foreground and the moon in the background, and I zoom in, the moon gets bigger along with Snow White. So they had to develop this multi-plane camera to just zoom it to pull certain layers in closer. Um, and because nobody had ever done it before, right? So it didn't look wonky as you tried to zoom in. Because if you think about walking in the woods, the stuff near you moves a lot faster than the stuff off in the distance. And Photoshop lets you do that with different layer mechanisms, and you can do it fairly well and fairly fast. And even I, who am not the Photoshop pro in the world, even I can do sort of that one. Um, and I'm not a Photoshop expert by any stretch of the imagination. It kind of, my work on that kind of begins and ends on, hey, I can add some words to a thumbnail. That's really about it. But and that was only because Bill showed me how to do that. Yeah. But I think that planar part is really kind of the another important bit that I'm not sure AI is ever going to really get that one, because if I say, hey, zoom in on this, is it really going to know what stays at a distance and what doesn't without some kind of a human in the loop to work with that tool and tell it, hey, this stays there, that stays there, move in on this. You still have to have that art direction, if you will, to really get it right. Does that make
Well,
sense?
because it's a tool like any other tool. You can't, it doesn't work on its own. You have to be the one to use the tool. So
can,
it's just another tool in the box for people to create more things artistically.
can I share something to the screen, Tim?
Yeah, you should be able to.
It's let me hang on a second. Let me share. So that's the screen. I want the is the window gonna share? Let me see. We'll do
I love it
that.
when Bill talks to himself.
Do you see
I do.
the web browser there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so now this is the IBM version that came out in 92, but this was originally released for the Amiga, which was a very graphically intense computer from Commodore back in the day. Um, but Disney back in 91 uh were showing off what they could do with computer software. And this was a commercially available program that you could get. You could install it on your PC. This was not an in-house application. So if you had an Amiga or if you had an IBM PC, you could install Disney animation software. And Maggie, you were talking about Onion Skin. The application actually featured the ability to have an onion skin type uh, drawing mode where you could draw in different half bright and quarter bright shades to do proper
Changed my
animation.
world.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
it changed my world being able to control those skins without having to flip through papers.
Yeah. Oh, so you've used this. You know about this. Okay.
I've used different variations as soon as I could get my hands on them growing up. I've tried my best to try and get a hold of anything I could create with.
I let me tell you something. I got this and various versions of Deluxe Paint over the years for my Amiga because I was an Amiga kid back then. And what they taught me, the very important lesson they taught me was that it doesn't matter if you blow half of your record store paycheck on a piece of computer software. If you can't draw a straight line, best software in the world. And that's what I found out to my great dismay. But the point is this was there. If you go back to the Sword in the Stone, the Sword in the Stone used primitive computer graphics. Not a lot of people know that. The famous sailing ship scene in The Little Mermaid, which was the beginning of the Disney Renaissance in the late 80s through the 90s. I remember reading a magazine. I was on college campus, and I was blown away because this computer visuals magazine, I don't even remember what it was talking about how there were 2,400 polygons in Eric's sailing ship in the beginning of the Little. I was like, 2,000 polygons, that must be a supercomputer. I've got like slop computer games where like 2,000 polygons is a character's single hand, right? So
Hmm.
but back then it was incredibly impressive, but they saw the value of using computer generated art right from the get-go. I guess, you know, I would love to see uh something like the Princess and the Frog.
Mm.
That was absolutely gorgeous. I would love to see Disney do something like that again. But even that, much of it was digital painted, not 3D CGI renders, but digital paint. I'm going to stop talking now because I'm starting to get out of my depth, but I just wanted to point that up that they did uh they leveraged computer technology fairly early on. And I think if Walt had by some miracle lived to see this, he would have given it an enthusiastic yes. Tim and I were talking the other day. I said I was going to shut up, and here I go. Tim and I were talking the other day about Maggie. I know you know about this sodium process. How
Hmm.
they basically, excuse me, they yellow screened the actors and the animation in Mary Poppins. I mean, the sodium process, that was amazingly high tech. That was bleeding edge. That was beyond the bleeding edge at the time. So while yes, I would absolutely love to see traditional hand painted cell animation, and I thrilled to see it when studios incorporated, or I go back and watch one of those Disney classics, or even something out of Japan. um I also don't fall into that purist idea of, Walt was always going to have a stadium sized room of 300 main animators and 2,500 tweeners all painting individual cells for 9.5 hours a day. Now I'll shut up.
Can you stop, hey,
Uh,
stop share, Bill? I think I can't do that from my end.
Oh, if I can find the button.
Well, he
Um,
was he was always a guy who wanted to push the limits. It should be down towards the bottom if you move your camera
okay.
thing on the screen. Um, he was always the guy who put actually I think I might be able to do it. Hang on. Stop participating. I can do it. Look
Oh,
at
woohoo! Thank
that.
you. Thank you.
hey.
He was always a guy who put technology out, but he also did something else, and I think this is the important difference. He loved technology and he loved being sort of the best of it because he was the first to kind of get he actually kind of figured out how to get the sound and the animation to line up. He personally figured that out, and it was a really simple trick he used, and I'd have to kind of explain it for a while, but it's on a documentary on the Imagineers on Disney Plus if you want to see it. But the company was like out of money when they figured out how to do that, and he had to like sell his car to pay for a second shot at getting sound done on Steamboat Willie. And of course, it paid off. But he also was a guy who always liked to push edges, right? He never wanted, he was never happy just doing one thing at a time, or kind of just taking things iteratively. He wanted to be the best at whatever he did. And one another one that just about broke the company, and never did quite make its money back because it kind of came out at the wrong time for something like this to hit because of World War II and some other stuff. It eventually made money, but not at first. Was this one? He had symphonies of music lined up with different animation that wasn't necessarily having anything to do with reality. It was some of it was just abstract art. But out of it came some of the most classic Disney stretches of animation we've ever seen. And in its first run, it lost money, just about hurt the company in the process. And for a while, it was actually looked up the numbers. Well, okay, honestly, I was reading the Gabler biography and he had the numbers in it. So I won't say that I looked them up, but I got fed them from a biography I was reading. They were using the animal documentaries to kind of keep the animation studio alive because Walt loved it. And to this day in Hollywood, if you talk about the big five, people kind of know you're talking about Snow White, Dumbo, Pinocchio, Cinderella, and Fantasia. And I want to take a moment from especially from you two because you have backgrounds in this, and especially you Maggie. Pinocchio. Forget Fantasia for a minute. That was just an absolute risk that I don't think anybody but Walt could have gotten away with. And it was pre-IPO for the company, I believe. Yeah, it was still pre-IPO for the company. So it was like their money they were risking. And I could just see that conversation with his older brother going, you want to do what? And you want the bank to finance this? Are you nuts? I mean, I could just see that conversation. Right? I'm quite sure it wasn't, all hearts and flowers. If sure, Walt, I'll support anything you want. I'm pretty sure the brother was like, dude, really? They were using the animal documentaries to kind of keep the company afloat because they were so cheap to make and made money. They're like, okay, we'll profit there, put it over here, see what happens, and it sort of worked. But those five, the thing I think that's interesting about those five is if you look at them, they don't look anything alike, right? And Disney loved technology, but he also loved putting creative people in control. So he's like, I want my creative people to be able to have set direction. Yeah, he was kind of in charge of that, but he also had a chance to say, okay, yes or no to different ideas. And the one that got me was Pinocchio. And I want to bring this one up specifically because number one, it's one of the classics. Everybody remembers Jiminy Cricket. Everybody remembers the whole story. Everybody wanted to be a real life boy. All that. It's a fun story to watch. Absolutely beautifully crafted. In some ways, could have probably scared younger kids with the whale and being eaten. But
yes.
the thing about it with modern audiences, and this is where people are going to get mad at me. Modern audiences, I think, are full of crap on occasion because they'll look at it and go, "I'm not going to watch that. It's not canon." Pinocchio the movie and Pinocchio the original story are absolutely nothing like each other at all. And today's modern audiences will be like, "Oh, it's not canon. I'm not going. I'm not." However, it's one of the classics.
Well, then those people really shouldn't be seeing The Little Mermaid either, because that was way more brutal in its original form. I mean, if they don't change it, it's going to be too much. So,
Yeah.
but keeping in the Pleasure Island and they won't come back as boys
Yeah.
is absolutely frightening. And they captured it perfectly.
Yeah. I tell you, the only like there's 2 points of contention I have, and I'm sure Tim can see these coming like a runaway war horse. Uh there was always talk in the 40s and 50s, and I don't know if this was conjecture or if this actually happened, whether or not someone addressed or approached Professor Tolkien about hey, let's make a Disney animated film. He Professor Tolkien hated Disney fantasy movies. Apparently, he was taken to a movie uh, to see Snow White, and like the portrayal of the dwarves just infuriated him. Like he was, oh, the singing and the rhyming, oh, it's just all wrong. So but it's J.R.R. Tolkien. I think C.S. Lewis was probably laughing his ass off next to him in the theater, but I think we can give the professor a little latitude, having not seen that. But the other place, and this is where I just go off the reservation for Tim and stop being reasonable, was the adaptation of the Black Cauldron. The Chronicles of Prydain deserved better story wise than what Disney did. The animation is gorgeous. I mean, we tend to think of the 70s as, and even into the early 80s, as an animation dead zone for Disney, that it was all just kind of slop, and I don't wholly agree with that. And the Black Cauldron was a beautifully animated film, but I thought that they butchered the story. But otherwise, yes, I agree. Some of those European fairy tales, like you say, The Little Mermaid. For those of you
Hmm.
who maybe haven't read and don't intend to read the story, she blows her deal and turns into sea foam. She literally just gets washed away at the
In
end.
one version, she takes a knife and cuts her fin open to make legs.
Yeah,
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 it
it's
gets real brutal.
yeah, and I mean, any number of European fairy tales that Disney changed to be a little bit more screen appropriate.
Hmm.
I think probably, in terms of visual entertainment for the whole family to enjoy, probably did a little bit better for the Disney treatment, and that's
So
your
so that
aircraft, Tim.
so that brings up an interesting point I wanted to make, and that's there's I think a difference in animation style. So if you look at like Disney, and that's kind of where we focus, because how can you not when you're talking about animation studios or something? I mean, at least have them be part of that discussion. But they also were the guys who were like, they were the Cadillac of animation studios, right? If you wanted high end, if you wanted the Bentley of animation movies, man, you went to them. And there's also a
Hmm.
difference between art and content, which we'll get to that in a minute. I mean, I can produce stuff with an AI and produce content all day long, but I'm not producing art. And there's a huge difference in between those two. Now, Disney wanted hyper realistic, art that made people fall in love. And he actually, when Snow White came out, he went into the premiere going, "Okay, I hope this works, because if it doesn't, I'm looking for a job tomorrow because my company's going to fail." Um, I don't think he would have given up, but it could have gone either way at that point, because they were way over budget and owed Bank of America a lot. Um, but then there's another style of animation that came out at the time that wasn't necessarily you know movie based, although there were a couple of films that came out of it. But there was a whole nother animation studio that was doing something else that did kind of do pretty well for years, that were these guys, right? um they
Heck
were just
yeah.
the slapstick funny Chuck Jones sort of animation, where it's just gag driven, and I love it. I mean, I'll watch Coyote and Roadrunner go at it all day long, um and not feel sorry for the coyote, because he always does it to himself. But
Every time.
well, that's not true. So, sometimes physics got in his way, but it was at least his own mistake. But the thing about that is it's still art. It's still driven by somebody with an artistic vision. And
Yes.
so as an artist yourself, Maggie, if somebody came at you and said, "Hey, let's do Cinderella," or "Hey, let's do Coyote and Roadrunner," yeah, which one is the woohoo, right?
Since I live in the Southwest, I would have a particular soft spot for the Coyote and the Roadrunner, just because it's my background. Uh, Everywhere you look, it looks just like that. I would really be so entertained with making the contraptions that he ordered from Acme. When I was a little kid, I wanted to work for Acme. Like I wanted to make the stuff that didn't work for him.
Right? You'd see all the like anti Roadrunner guided robot missile. I was like,
Yes.
where can I get one? When can I get one?
Well, I
What
started drawing like cogs for machines because I thought it was just so interesting how the machines would blow up, like how they would all come apart and how intricate the engineering was to make all these moving parts for this machine to just blow up on him. It is fascinating to me.
See, I absolutely love that. I love seeing animation where you see things slide and move and rotate, and you're like, that's not, the artist isn't just like, I'm not drawing the gear anymore because that housing is closed over it. That gear has
Hmm.
slid back 5 degrees and retracted, and he's drawn the piece to make it do that. So in your
Yes.
mind's eye, you're picturing those mechanisms, and that a lot of that is why I love some of the 80s and 90s Japanese animation. You look at Shiro or Otomo, and like I was just literally this morning talking to somebody over on Twitter about the and Maggie, I don't know if you've ever seen Akira, the Japanese animation.
I have
Um,
not.
okay. One of the protagonists has this custom motorcycle. He's part of a motorcycle gang in this cyberpunk future Japan, and his Kaneda's motorcycle. It's iconic. Every piece on it is engineering feasible to the point that you can get one built. Like if you take the reference drawings to a mechanic, they can build it, and people have done that. People with a lot
Wow.
more money than me have done that. They've gotten Kaneda's motorcycle built, and then there's on the other side you've got an artist named Masamune Shiro. I've got a couple of his art books over here. But Shiro, in all of his power armor and even just stuff on the walls, he says all those cables do things. When I'm drawing that, I have all of those cables, all of those pieces that move. I don't just draw them there to fill up space. I
No.
picture that's a power cable that carries hydraulic fluid, that carries oxygen, and on and on and on and on. And I love that. But to go back to Roadrunner, Chuck Jones, his team did the same thing. You know, I
Hmm.
mean,
Yes.
the grommet was being pulled by a chain that was attached to the pulley that was on the pedals that the
Yes.
coyote was moving with his feet. It wasn't just like, yeah, just draw a bunch of crap. They made stuff that worked, and
Hmm.
I adored that.
Me too. It really made me want to go ahead and keep teaching myself anything I could that would help with that. Well, that led to a lot of side quests into learning anatomy and how the anatomy moves, how the anatomy moves for different animals. How do they move this way and that way? What would happen if you stretch it? How far can you stretch it until it doesn't look reasonably like the thing it originated as? So those things and those little learning side treks have really kind of led a foundation to, because you have to be able to know how everything is put together to be able to draw anything. So if you want to be able to draw anything, you need to know how everything goes together.
Well,
Yeah.
that's an interesting. So I'm going to bring one up. I'm not sure if I'm the only one that knows this because I read a lot of biographies and I've read Chuck Jones's autobiography, which it's a very interesting book if you haven't read it, and he includes the 10 rules for the Roadrunner. But one of the other things he did was he talked about some of the more famous ones, the famous cartoons that he did over the years, including one with Bugs Bunny. And the guy who was funding it, the guy who was kind of in charge of the money, came in and goes, "Okay, you guys could do whatever you want. I think this is great, but the one thing I never want to see is a bullfight because that's never funny. I need everything to be funny." So of course they went, "Okay, cool." And spent 2 weeks and turned this in, and it turned out to be one of the funniest things that
That is.
ever came out of the studio. But that's the difference, I think, between the way some companies work and others. And the reason I want to bring that one up is one guy had like an accounting way of running the company. He's like, bullfights aren't funny. And the other guy is an artist who says, I can make it funny, right? And he worked with his team, and it turned out to be freaking hilarious. Because I mean, Bugs versus the bull just kind of getting frustrated to the point where he's like, you know what? I don't care about the rabbit anymore. Just stop.
Well, but do you think it's a reaction to that limitation? Like uh like even exercising your mind by giving yourself limitations, like limiting the amount of supplies you can use to create something. Only allowing yourself to draw with one pen instead of multiple other things that you have available. What can you come up with? What can you come up with that's the same size as this little piece of something? Like
Well,
that limitation creates so much creativity.
so it certainly drives some of the best engineering choices I've seen in my career. So I work in the science and engineering side, right? So, and Bill, you did some work for NASA over the years, right? So we had this one project where I was trying to design a sensor system for a project for something, and they're like, okay, it has to be exactly the size and weigh absolutely no more than this, and I'm like, that's really small and light. That can't be done. And they're like, yeah, but it has to work because it's 53 reasons why. And then you figure out it's like, oh, it's going into space. Oh boy. So, you boil down to, you have to kind of get really creative to do that. You have to kind of get really creative to say, hey, look, I'm going to only use, my fountain pen or something, and kind of work from there. Maybe that's the case. Maybe it is sort of those restrictions kind of foster innovation. I think in this particular case, Chuck Jones was just like, okay. But
maybe more motivated by spite. Like, oh, I'll show you funny.
like that might have been it. Because at the time he was Chuck Jones, right? You couldn't really yell at him too much, but
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tim.
I think he made it funny, but he also made it stylistically different, because had the bull been, a different style, had it been a different look, it might not have been nearly as funny. But he came up with this massive, intimidating bull that everybody runs from. And then here's this bunny rabbit like smacking him across the face, going, no, right? So it's
I think limitations can produce some really, really great things, and a lot of innovation can come from that. One of the on very rare occasions now, this may come as a shock and a surprise to you, Maggie. So brace yourself. You're already sitting down. I like role-playing games.
No.
I'm a bit of an aficionado for Dungeons and Dragons, and one of the side parts of the hobby that for a lot of people is the hobby. Like they don't tabletop game anymore. They just do, this is miniatures. 28 millimeter, 54 millimeter. But I not incredibly well. I certainly wouldn't enter in a contest. I'm not humble bragging or looking for praise or anything like that. But I do paint miniatures. I have more unpainted than painted. It's a constant shame of mine. But
everybody has more unpainted than painted.
I have. Find me the gamer without a shelf of shame, and I'll find you someone who doesn't game. But the miniature painter, like I have a process of painting my miniatures, and I don't recommend anyone do it. Because it's slop painting. if it's a monster that's going to be sitting out on the table and people are going to look at and say, how can I carve this into experience points in the quickest and least dangerous to my character as possible? I'm not going to sweat over, did I get his eyeballs just right? Do I have enough shading at the base of his claws to make things work? I knock it out very quickly. But for the diminishingly small number of people who've ever asked me, hey Bill, can you tell me how to paint in miniatures? I would never say, yeah, just slop some paint on there. You know,
Mhm.
um,
Yes.
start properly, start with a full process and work your way to cheapness, if that makes sense. But it goes back to what you were saying, Maggie, about understanding like anatomy. You know, I'll see
Mhm.
like cheapy 80s fantasy action movies where the poster artist was clearly just riffing off of Frazetta or Vallejo, and it's
Yes.
like, yeah, okay, that works. There's a wizard, there's a barely clothed woman, and then there's a barbarian guy. I get it. Maybe I pick this up at Blockbuster, maybe I pass on it. But if you really sit and you look at those pictures for, like, you know, Charles S. Band or Canon Films or something like that, the more you look at
Mhm.
them, the more your brain just rebels against what you're seeing, because you look at the muscled barbarian and it's just like there's just random lumps and bulges all over the guy, and you're like, I don't think you know how human anatomy works. um,
Yes. Like all
but
superheroes need to be an upside down triangle. So they have
yeah,
these itty bitty feet that were they would fall over if it was real.
yeah.
Sometimes they push it so far.
So you've seen Todd McFarlane's work then.
Yes.
But but um but again, when you're limited, there are people who paint miniatures incredibly better than I do, and they'll do little kind of, haha, look what I can do challenges on YouTube. They'll go
Hmm.
to the dollar store and they'll buy like below apple barrel quality paints, and they'll
Hmm.
bring them back, and then they'll paint a miniature that's more gorgeous than the most meticulously painted miniature that I could ever do on my best day with a million proper brushes and all 200 bottles of my paint. And they do it with like 4 paints and cheap ass nylon brushes that they bought again at the dollar store, and say,
Hmm.
see, this is all you need. Well, no, that's not. That
No.
I think that sends a terribly bad message to people who are getting into any kind of artistic pursuit. You
Oh
you
yeah.
you need to start with a proper process and work towards cheap and nasty. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm just, you're an actual artist. You know what you're doing. So I'm just,
I am an artist, but at the same time, I'm also the artist that started managing an art store because I wanted the discount on art supplies because I wanted to try out all of them.
there you
So I got
go.
a little bit of everything. And most of my paychecks went straight to that just to try the cheapest versus the most expensive. And a middle ground is not bad. People think it's more expensive, it's going to be better. Not necessarily in art world.
No, no,
Not at all.
definitely not. It goes back to what I said about the computer software. I wasted money. I wasted money that would have been better spent on other pursuits, on expensive ass computer art software, only to find out that if you don't understand the basics, the most expensive package in the world is not going to help.
So
Yes.
that I think brings us back to something. And Meg, I'd love your take on this. Is when you put the creatives in charge and you let the artists kind of drive the art instead of having like a computer guy like me or whatever, a spreadsheet kind of drive the art, I think you get a much different result. So like those first five in Disney, the Snow White, Dumbo, Pinocchio, Cinderella, and Fantasia, if you look at animation over time throughout them, you get a much different look and feel until kind of recently. Then everything kind of starts to sort of look kind of the same, with a few standouts. And it was sort of in that late 80s, early 90s phase when that happened. So, like, Beauty and the Beast, when it came out, I mean, it was unlike visually anything we'd seen in a very long time. Um,
Mm,
especially when you
yeah,
walk in that when they walk to that
except for
ballroom.
one part.
Yeah,
One part, the ballroom dancing, that was stolen from Cinderella.
it completely stolen from Cinderella, right?
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
well, yeah, but it that notwithstanding, yeah, but Cinderella didn't dance with a beast. It was a big deal.
No, but the prince was a stand-in for the beast, I suppose.
Yeah, that's true. Um, and then when you get to others, I think they kind of become sort of again, sort of, oh, it's a Disney film, it's a Disney film, it's a Disney film. And then you get to it looked the same, but they had a different story in Frozen. And I think they kind of drove that one in a much different way because it did kind of still look just like a Disney film
Hmm.
um, from that perspective, but they kind of put story people in charge of that one. I think a lot more. Um,
Hmm.
and I remember when my daughter was little, Disney princesses would come and go until she got to Elsa, and then that woman never left. I mean, it just it stuck around forever. And I talked to people who had been elementary school teachers, and they're like, "Yeah, it's weird. I've been some have been teachers for 30 and 35 years. You have Disney Princess of the Year forever, and then all of a sudden Elsa came here, and it's like Elsa's decade, right? It just hit." And they didn't go anywhere else. And so as an artist, I think one of the things a lot of people struggle with, and I know Bill struggles with it, and I'm going to rat you out, Bill. And I know as an engineer and a scientist and as somebody who's written books, I try to work with teams of people, but sometimes people don't necessarily work best in the team environment. Bill likes to pretend that he's a flow chart of one, right? Because
Yeah, my org chart is just a rectangle with my name in the middle.
yeah. So when you're dealing with things in the art space, you sometimes, of course, do commissions or somebody's kind of directing what they want. But
Hmm.
do you find it easier to work with teams? Does the outcome of something change, or does it get better? You think when you have sort of the right people who know how to work together instead of one who just sort of takes over and drives it, or is it sort of that collaborative process? Because I think that's a big difference. You got to have the right team, the right team. That's important. Instead of just like one guy yelling at everybody to get his way, or kind of running off and doing things by yourself. I'll shut up
Okay.
now.
The the phrase I want to say is too many chefs ruin the soup.
Mhm.
Sometimes too many opinions at the same time is too many opinions, and you can't hear any good opinions if you're too busy dealing with the screaming of all the opinions. So
Mhm.
having one person being able to drive by by plan and then also being able to be flexible enough to deal with creatives who always will think outside of the box so much that it may get off topic. So it's nice to have that balance of people and ideas. Like if you're one of one, you have a lot of arguments with yourself, mainly in public, of no, should I do that? No, I shouldn't do that. But this will be the benefit. So being only one and only having one bounce back of sound of the opinion, it it works sometimes for some certain things, but then again, having other people around, possibly in the same field, bounce ideas off of occasionally is really, really nice to have that back and forth, but you don't need it all the time because if it was all the time, it'd be way too much. So you see where
So,
there's kind of a
so,
balance
so,
of
see, you
plan
got to have that.
and creative.
I think the way Bill and I think you've talked to him, Richard Witters put it is there's a difference between being an artist and being the art director who has to make everybody feel heard.
Yes.
Sometimes you
Yes.
have to like massage egos and be like, okay, I hear what you're saying.
Yes. Yes.
I
I
think
think you've described every relationship working I've had with most of the men I've known too. It's rephrasing it to make it, oh, okay, this is how you understand. Okay, got it.
I, I think in the animation field, I think probably again this is from up in the cheap seats, just my perspective. Probably one of the best examples of walking that balance when he was working in the field of animation. If you go back and look at the body of work of Ralph Bakshi, he was a firebrand. He basically stood up and told Walt Disney, "Screw you! I'm going to go create my own animation studio with blackjack and hookers." And If you've seen Fritz the cat, you understand he did
Yes.
just exactly that.
Yeah,
But
and I can understand why he and Walt wouldn't have gotten along very well.
but but uh but Ralph Bakshi famously, now I'm not super fond of his treatment of Lord of the Rings, but it certainly was an admirable effort. But there was a scene where and this a lot of people go heavy into, they either love or hate Bakshi's use of rotoscoping. And when they were shooting the the Lord of the Rings and getting image ideas, uh he struggled with, how do we make realistic flapping cloaks? So they went out and they put a bunch of people in cosplay and they ran around in a field and they had their cloaks flapping and they filmed it all. They shot the entire thing and I don't remember if it was 70 or 35, probably 35. I don't know that Paramount was going to hand him a 70 millimeter Panavision for what they considered a cartoon. But so they shot it and they brainstormed for the longest time, like, okay, if we rotoscope this, what do we do for keyframes and so on and etc. And finally he just said, well, look, we have the footage. Why don't we just use the footage? We have people in costumes. They look right. The scenery is right. We can, we can do a process shot and put the animation around them. Let's just do that. Whether or not you think that was a good choice, whether or not you think that's visually appealing, the fact of the matter is that's how they got around it. And it was just kind of that decision point in the filmmaking process where one person stood up, and in this case it was Bakshi, saying, we filmed it, use that. So I don't know what the lesson there is other than Ralph Bakshi did his own thing.
They might call that a tracer in some places. sorry, I had to do that. So I was watching Kevin Smith movies the other day, and
this guy has traces.
Traces.
Oh, you're a tracer.
He's a tracer.
But the thing, so now to the big elephant in the room as we come into the days of AI, right? And I think it's still a difference in between art and content. So like I can produce content all day long, right? And I think the AI stuff kind of got started a number of years ago before people realized it, because even special effects in like the last 20 Marvel movies have been using AI forever. But I think these guys kind of started that, where, if you look at a Pixar film, you could tell at a glance it's a Pixar film, right? It's not like you look at it and go, hey, maybe that's somebody else. You're like, no, that's Pixar. It's just visually, you know what it looks like. They don't really change. They kind of all have that same sort of feel, although I think Ratatouille was probably their best. But they all have that same look. But again, if you have that look and you put the right artist in charge, the end result is something kind of different. If you have an artistic vision of what to do with that sort of aesthetic, I think you come up with something that kind of works. And I think the difference between like art and content is, like me, if you watch my TikTok or X feed at all, you'll see me doing sort of these Google VO 8-second video clips of dragons telling dad jokes.
Yes.
Which I thought were cute. Some people yell at me. But that's content, right? That's not art. That's just me throwing stuff out because I get bored. And I want to play with the Google tool, and it's kind of fun to play with. But and dad jokes are funny. I mean, who doesn't like a dad joke? But I think that's the big difference. And I think that's where people misinterpret things. Like, not everything that gets put out in life is going to be a fantastic work of art. Some things are going to be popcorn flicks. Some things are going to be streaming service produced things that you get 10 episodes of, but you're not going to put the same production quality into it that you put into a Cinderella, or you put into a Frozen, or you put into, whatever the next Pixar franchise is. I think those are different beasts. And the advantage, and I'm going to use this term very carefully, to an AI tool like Google VO or Pixar's tools or whatever, is it lowers the bar to say, hey, look, maybe I can do something artistic or interesting with that tool. It lowers the barrier to entry, to me being able to do something highly creative, that I wouldn't necessarily be able to do otherwise, or highly artistic that I wouldn't necessarily be able to do otherwise. Is it a perfect world? No, it's not a perfect world, but I think it does lower that barrier to entry, because if you were going to try to go produce a 30-minute short film and compete with the Disneys of the world for eyeballs, man, that's a tough road to get. I mean, that's hard. Right? You're not going to do that with a Kickstarter and a Dream unless you have tool sets that level that playing field. And I think that's what some of these newer ones are willing to do. And I'm getting to a point here in a second. The new version of VO that's in production, that's in beta, lets me take an image. So let's say I draw an image. Let's say I drew this red dragon, which I didn't, but let's pretend that I did for a second, because, and I will put up front, I did not draw that dragon. Okay, but let's say that I did. I can upload my image of that dragon and say, animate this, and have it say this joke and then wind up laughing at the end. Okay. So at least allows me to have the starting point from which the AI then takes over, and you can start to produce something. Now, would it take the place of a master artist? Absolutely not. But might it help with that in-between stuff where you can now produce that at a much less expensive level, and allow the amount of people who have the capability to produce something on an artistic level that other people may really care about, that could compete with the Disneys or Pixars of the world. And now you've got it in the hands of people like Maggie and Bill, and for a $20 a month service fee, you could produce enough. You could produce a couple minutes of video, because for $20 a month, I could probably produce about 4 minutes of real AI video. And if you're paying $200 a month, you get a lot more. But for $20 a month, I could produce 4 or 5 minutes worth of AI video using the Google system.
The only way I can describe my view on it is kind of like musicians feel about plugins for people who are not necessarily musicians or musically inclined to be able to create music without actually playing any instruments. It's that kind of feeling where it's like it's missing something. It's not exactly, if you were playing it, it would sound unique to you, like the artist creating something.
I agree. I agree with you, Maggie, on that front. I mean, I was fortunate enough to a few years ago, I had a couple of fans of my live stream who are already musicians, and they already had a couple of kind of folk rock sort of concept albums out. I used to joke, because I would start my live streams, I would just turn the camera on and start talking. And I would say, I'll get an intro one of these days if I can have music, because just a silent pan across stuff, B-roll, would just be dull and uninteresting. And since I can't afford to pay good musicians to make good music, then I'm not going to bother. And they reached out to me and they're like, plug us and we'll make music to order. And they did. And I have very, very nice music that starts up my live streams now. A shameless plug for Bards of Greyhawk. But anyway, they
have to be Owl Bears. I mean,
no, that was Bob. Bob has the outro music. Bob Antone did Owl Bears for my closing credit. But no, the Bards, they stepped up and did it. And golly, if I had just waited 2 or 3 more years, I could have just typed in this. But what they made for me has soul. I sat down with those two excellent musicians, and they said, what do you want it to sound like? What is your vibe? What are you thinking? And we brainstormed for hours on what I wanted to sound like. I was like, think like some of Jimmy Page's acoustic works on some of the lighter weight stuff that Zeppelin did, or maybe with like a touch of what the Almonds did on Idlewild South, but bring your own unique sound to say. That is where I'm going. And they made this amazing piece of music called Summer Mountain that I used just like a little slice of in my opening credits. And I I am eternally grateful to them. I wouldn't feel nearly as passionate about that piece of music if I had just typed in to whatever program. Acoustic music sounds like Jimmy Page, sounds like Acoustic Allman Brothers, 45 seconds. And I could I could have waited, and I could have if I had known that AI tools were just around the corner to get that. Yeah, I could have gotten that. But I value what the Bards did for me. Rich and Jeremy did such an incredible job, and I'm eternally grateful for that. I mean, they made me a song in return for me putting their URL in my socials, and I can't. I mean, I can't beat that. With that said, I think there's a you know I think there's a delineation of, I have this idea. I want to pre-visualize it. God help me, I can't draw a straight line. I mean, if I could have told Disney Art Studio or Deluxe Paint back on my Amiga, hey, don't do what I'm telling you to do. Do what I want you to do. That might have that might have changed things and gotten me going in a different direction. But you know, I'm not throwing anything in your face here at all, Maggie, but I think about people maybe who wanted to paint, perhaps in the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s. Well, where do I get paint? Well, go grind up these bug shells. I have to cut firewood for 11 hours. I don't have time to do that. Well, sounds to me like somebody's not going to be an artist, But now I can go to an art store and not only buy paint, I can buy paint that won't kill me with heavy metal poisoning. So,
and if it's Michael's, they send you a 50% off coupon every couple of days. So
yeah. but I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I like the fact that there are tools that can give you that initial push. But on the other hand, I don't think you should just put your feet up and say, okay, AI, just push me. Just keep pushing me forward.
No, I see it as a tool for somebody who actually has artistic vision. I don't see it as a replacement for, a bunch of artists. I think those are two completely different things. And I will freely admit that I have like no artistic vision whatsoever. Because I will bring up as an example, this book cover right here. This is one of my books. It's called The Diocese Dilemma. I'm working on the sequel to it right now. Shameless plug for my writing. But I gave this a finished. I had no idea what I wanted to do with a cover for this, by the way. I had no vision for this whatsoever. And this is probably the most expensive book cover I've ever had done. Because the guy that did this actually did the Ghostbusters, when the first one that had the kids in it, he did movie posters for that. So it's a book about a Catholic priest who becomes a serial killer. Well, sometimes people in confession just need to have a little bit harder lesson they learn. Eye for an eye, baby. And I had no idea what to do with it, like none, because it's set modern day, and I'm like, it was Inquisition is a little different. And I was talking to the guy who was the artist, and he's like, look, it's the kind of book I like to read anyway, so send me some chapters. So I sent him some chapters, and he came back with that. And I'm like, perfect. Right. I didn't know what I wanted, but it kind of gives you this creepy vibe. You're like, yeah, there's something not right about that priest. Some people are a little bit beyond absolution on this plane of existence, and they just need to go meet St. Peter and let him sort it out. I do not apologize for what I did to the child rapist. It was not pretty. Bill's trying to ignore it now. He's like, I'm not.
I'm waiting for an artistic opening. That's all.
I no, it was artistic in a way. It involved a fishing pole, um, and some meat hooks. Anyway, details. Some people are artists in different ways. Mine, when I had friends who read that, went, "You're really weird." I had others going, "Okay." My co-author's wife read it and went, "What is wrong with you?" I'm like, "Well, he's been married to you for like 20 years." Anyway, but I think that the difference is the artistic vision is not driven by tools. It's driven by you having that vision and having something you want to do. And I would have never come up with that in a billion years. But I've come up with that conveys in an image creepy overtones. You're not sure which way this priest is going, because in the book he could be either your best friend or really not. It could go either way. He could be like, yeah, say 3 Hail Marys and have a nice day and let me help you get into college. Or okay, you've gone one too far. So he does kind of sit both sides of it. And it was nice to have somebody who could be able to take that and go, well, maybe that guy's nice, maybe he's not. And you kind of get that feeling, at least I think you do, from that cover. And the next one is going to be more interesting. We'll just leave it at that. He has help. But I think that's kind of my point into this whole thing about animation, is that people who want to go backwards and say, oh, we should do it all by hand, it should all be art driven, it should all be this, it should all be that. I think sometimes there's a difference in between what can be done for a cost basis that's relevant and a cost basis that's going to be able to make it so that you can keep redoing these things. Because Disney, had he been alive today, I think he would have embraced newer technologies for sure, because you can't produce a Cinderella today and have it be done at a price that you're going to be able to have the company survive very often. It's just not going to make it, right? Because you're not going to sell enough tickets to make that one come back out even. So that was kind of my whole point to this discussion is, hey, people who want to go backwards, that's great. But I think if you go backwards, what you see is movies that were done that had artists in charge and people with artistic vision in charge, and they were using the tools of the day, whatever that was. And if they had to invent a multiplanar camera, they did it, which they did. But they used the best tools they had to produce the best product they could. And that's what I think, if you have the right artistic vision and the right artists in charge, keyword, artists in charge, using those tools and directing that team, I think that's where you're going to wind up with the best result. And whatever those tools are, as long as you've got those artists and artistic vision in charge of it, I think that's really where the industry should go. It's because you're going to get much better results out of it because you got better tools.
I agree with that.
No disagreement here.
The combining of the two, I think, is important, but just relying on only one or the other has drawbacks that are immeasurable. So it's just the combination of the two, I think, can make something fantastic. It's trying to stop it from going one way heavy or the other heavy.
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? Is you've got to strike that balance. And I think that's what early Disney managed to do, was they struck the balance between art and commerce. Commerce was necessary to support the art and vice versa. But I think they struck that balance. And the one that sticks out in my head is, if you look backwards, you can really and this is the one where I have to give Walt Disney credit, because if you read about his life and his history, he wasn't always the nicest guy, but he accomplished a lot of really great things. And a guy that accomplishes that much sometimes isn't the nicest guy in the world. He had his moments, like when he kind of got crosswise with some unions. But I think if you look at the ones he was intimately involved with, Fantasia, Snow White, and then Disney kind of goes on this, well, we're still doing things, but whatever. And then all of a sudden he got really involved with one, and the result was Mary Poppins. Right. And that was one that he was there on set every day, kind of making sure it came out right, being incredibly nitpicky about everything. I think, and the result is a movie that to this day you can watch and go, I get it. Right. That makes sense to me. And Dick Van Dyke must have been exhausted at the end of every day of shooting, because the man was so high energy, insane. But I think, and now he could actually play the 99-year-old banker. Just
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he could. Oh my gosh. He could almost still do the dance.
I saw him on something the other day. He actually does still kind of do it.
Yeah.
Hands up. Who would watch a movie directed by Clint Eastwood starring Dick Van Dyke? I would.
Right here. I would watch that. I would
Can we
watch it. It was even animated with those two. That would be entertaining to watch.
Heck yeah.
can we get Mel
Oh,
Brooks to
can you
do a
imagine the
walk on?
wrinkles? The wrinkles moving and everything. Oh man, we can. Oh, it would be like
Can we-
looking at the ocean.
The texture.
Can we get Mel Brooks to do a walk on?
Oh, there you go.
Yes. Oh, I
Three
would lose my
centuries of
mind.
film in one shot.
Wow. Oh,
Imagine
yeah.
if the
Happy
building
birthday,
blew
Mel
up right at
Brooks.
that point.
Right?
Yeah.
You'd be wiping
Happy
out.
birthday to Mel Brooks today. Whoa.
Yeah, it is. He turned 99 today. I mean,
Yes.
Wow.
and he's
Yes.
doing Spaceballs too, like right now. They're
Yes. So excited.
if they don't call it the quest for more money, I'm going to be so upset.
Oh, it's already been laid out. It's all set for him.
Already there.
Oh.
And I will appreciate this one because they got a lot of the original people back. They even got Rick Moranis to come out of retirement for this.
Which is crazy because Moranis was like, I'm done.
And I think this
I'm-
holds because it's the difference between art and not. Mel Brooks is definitely an artist. The dude dates back to
Yes.
Vaudeville. I mean, I will watch him.
Yes.
And if you haven't seen the producers, either version of it, watch the producers. It's freaking hilarious. It it sums up it sums up Broadway in one film. And if you watch the second one, I mean Nathan Lane, you can't get funnier than Nathan Lane. Just the way when Matthew Broderick goes, okay, assume you're not an honest man. He's like, assume. It's just the way he answers that question is just
The way that he incorporated slapstick Bugs Bunny into Blazing Saddles, just
Oh God, yes.
Chef's kiss.
That was so, oh.
oh,
That- I mean, if you want to get right down to it, Blazing Saddles is basically an adult Bugs Bunny cartoon.
Candygram from Mongo. Oh,
Candygram from Mongo, and they
somebody
played
got to
the
go
Warner
back and get a
Brothers
shitload
outro.
of dimes.
Yeah, it's just they're oh my gosh, so
the only
wonderful.
thing that's missing out of this new Spaceballs 2 has got to be John Candy. My heart broke thinking
They got,
that. Oh yeah,
oh God. I can see him. I'm drawing a blank on his name. The guy that did the voice for the snowman in Frozen. Josh Gad.
oh okay.
Josh
yes.
Gad is taking that role.
Okay,
Oh, interesting.
I'm not saying he's a much different actor than John Candy, but he's hilarious. He's he's a different energy than John Candy was, but you're not going to find a drop-in replacement for John Candy. You just not.
yeah.
That's absolutely true. We can't expect that out of somebody completely different. But
Yeah.
he could do it really good justice, and I hope him the best that he does, because that's a lot of shoe to fill.
It is, and the one thing I love about him is he's an interesting guy in a lot of ways, and because he does a lot of Broadway, there's a lot of people who make assumptions about him, and it. I saw him on something recently, and they're like, "Is there any part of your career you would do differently?" He goes, "There's only one thing I would actually do a little bit different, and that's like the talking parts of Olaf. He would have like disguised his voice somehow because apparently now when he walks around, kids are like, do Olaf, do Olaf. He's like, I would do anything but that because his kids are apparently massively embarrassed by the fact that his dad sounds just like Olaf wherever they go. And he's like, my kids are just never going to hear the end of this. It's just, but that particular movie, and that this goes back to animation because that particular movie, yeah, I mean the artistic style was kind of the same as a lot of modern Disney movies, but the adding a talking snowman was hilarious. And in the second movie, when Olaf describes the first movie for 2 minutes, and the guards are just standing there like in disbelief, I'm like, okay, that was just one of the funniest things I've seen in a Disney movie in decades. I mean, it just
I still go back to some of the jokes from Emperor's New Groove. There's a lot of jokes in that one that just has still permeated to where people still, it's been like 20 years since it's been out, I think. 30 years maybe. And
Yeah.
it was amazing. And it still gets quotes all the time.
Right.
It's just beautiful. And and the fact that all of those animated movies are still so quotable, just like regular movies of regular acting human beings on film. The fact that they're so ingrained in people's minds, I think more and more animation is going to creep into our psyche and be part of so much more memories as time goes on.
I
So
agree.
It's just, it's
Bill's
going to be
Bill's gonna
amazing.
Bill's gonna completely admonish me for that. But I my kids when they were little never saw. They just recently I made them all sit down and they're 12, 14, and 15. And I kind of forced them to sit down and watch one with me, which I don't normally force my kids to do, but they'd never seen Aladdin. And I'm like, oh my
Oh,
gosh, got it. Yeah, I know.
oh,
Right? So I know I'm
oh.
failing as a parent, and they're like, we don't want to watch this. But then the moment Robin Williams,
Yeah.
voice comes out of, they're
Oh.
like, who is that? I'm like, it's Robin Williams, the guy
Uh,
from Mrs. Doubtfire. They're like,
just oh,
whoa,
just amazing. I mean, I can we could go another 3 hours just gushing about Aladdin. Let me tell you what, Aladdin has overwritten several important parts of my higher brain functions because when my daughter was a toddler, um, I had to drive around town a lot. My father was ill at the time, and I'd have to take him to specialists all over the place. And I was the stay-at-home dad, and my daughter Charlotte in the back. We had a little portable DVD player that hung on the back of the seat, for when we were driving, and I memorized the pattern of what buttons to reach back and hit on the DVD player after the movie stopped to get back to the main menu, go to the right part of the main menu, and then press start again. Just driving down Colonial Drive in Orlando with Charlotte getting more and more agitated at me in the back seat there until I got Aladdin going again for yet another trip. So and heaven help me if she wanted a different movie, because then I'd be like, okay, Dad, we've got plenty of time to get to the doctor's office, but I got to pull into this parking lot and put Little Mermaid in. So,
so when my kids were little, it was Bolt. But the Aladdin, the thing that still gets quoted around this house around here, and it's been 5 or 6 weeks now, is uh uh enormous galactic power, itty bitty living space. Just the way Robin Williams delivers that.
our favorite is, you idiot, we've all got swords. We try and find a context for that. Is it, it's like, look out, he's got, like, if I have to kill a spider or something like that, look out, he's got a shoe. And so, you idiot, we've all got shoes.
But that one, I think, and again, it's another one that I think the art was not necessarily one that stands out. It doesn't necessarily have it does have a little bit of a unique look, but the voice acting in that movie really sells it, because you've got Robin Williams, the guy the evil guy. I can't remember who voices that, but he was just deliciously evil. I mean, I don't think you could have gotten a better performance out of Vincent Price on that particular. Okay, maybe out of Vincent Price, but he was just deliciously evil the way he came across. You're like, and those two kind of going at it. You're like, you almost don't care about Aladdin and the princess by the end of it. You're just like, I just want to see more of the genie and the bad guy, right? It's just because they were so good.
So speaking of art and art styles and the Disney Renaissance, I have a trivia question for you, Maggie.
Ooh,
And I don't know. You're not Gen X, at least I don't know. But anyway, so
I'm
this
considered an elder millennial, I
uh,
guess. I'm like 3 months older than MTV.
fair enough.
Weird part.
We'll give you honorary Gen X status then.
All right.
There you go. Tim, get that up to committee. Get that
Do
paperwork.
I get a jacket?
We'll get you your Cinderella concert T-shirt and your silk bomber jacket in the mail, I'm sure. But anyway, so I thought this was one of the strangest art decisions that Disney ever made. So you've seen Hercules, right? Of
Yes.
course, you've seen Hercules. Do you know who the art director for Hercules was?
No, I do not.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Are you a fan of Pink Floyd?
Yes.
You are. Okay. So obviously you have a gatefold copy of The Wall on vinyl, right? You've seen Pink
Well,
Floyd's The Wall.
yes.
Same guy. Gerald
No.
Scaraf, who literally up to this point, other than some commercial pieces, Gerald Scaraf was best known for the in some places, and I mean this in a good way, shocking artwork he did for Pink Floyd, both the animated sequences in the wall and the artwork in the gatefold. And probably his best known work up to that point was a stridently anti-American bit of political satire, a book called Scar Strangled Banger,
Oh,
which
what?
was a send up of the Reagan administration in political cartoons. So
Oh,
So
I
here he
watched
is.
Aladdin,
Floyd.
Aladdin. I watched Hercules for the first time, and I'm enjoying it. Art director Gerald Scarf, and I'm like, no, that can't be the same Gerald Scarf. So I went to Google and I'm like,
wow.
it's the same Gerald
That's
Scarf. And then
that you've
going
just
back and
you just called my entire afternoon. That rabbit hole is now mine. I now live there. It's going to live there
please
in my head rent
enjoy.
free. Thank you.
So yeah. So, but if you go back and you watch, you watch Hercules, you're like, I can see it now. It will watch Hercules, look at his art, and it will start to click. You'll realize,
Did not know
yes,
that. That's amazing.
that is so. There you go. There's your trivia. The marching hammers, the neo-fascist imagery, the nightmare sequences of the wall constructing and crushing people.
hmm
Hercules.
I see. It's actually hard for me to watch Hercules the movie, except for Hades. Everything else I have a problem with because I really love Greek mythology, and they got so much of it wrong that it's really painful to watch.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
artistic style is gorgeous. The way that they animated his hair and the fear on his underlings' faces, like even
Yeah.
when he gets upset, that fiery grin of just like screaming. It's just the animation is beautiful, but the
Eh,
story itself,
yeah.
they made Hercules okay, but they made Zeus to not be Zeus, and that bothered me the whole time.
Yeah.
You
We could
better
say
not watch
some.
the most recent version of the Thor movie then, because Zeus comes off like a complete ding. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't. I was warned against it. I was warned against it.
Yeah. The I kind of noped out of the Marvel stuff after the Avengers Endgame, but that's another video entirely, I think.
That's a whole
but
nother rabbit hole.
Yes.
I think the point is, again, to go back to the whole point of what I was trying to talk about here, is that's another example of putting a true artist in charge of something like this, somebody who actually does have an artistic vision, artistic style, and saying, do that. Now, whether or not they stuck to the story in a way that makes sense is another question, but at least the art that's on the screen had a very unique way of doing things. And anybody who could produce, a fully functioning thing for Pink Floyd and, sort of be sober at the end of it is, you got to give them credit.
Sober's
Um,
relative.
Yeah.
but it to me that's another example of, you put an artist in charge, you get a work of art out the back end, no matter what the tools are. And I think that's really where I'd love to see some of these. That's where I can really tell the difference between people who love what they do and people who don't, when you watch some of what happens. So like art versus artists, or art versus whatever. It's not animated, but there was a thing that kind of took Netflix by storm during COVID, called Squid Games. Right, everybody watched the
hmm
first season of Squid Games, and everybody talked about the first season of Squid Games ad nauseum. And I will admit, I was as hooked as everybody else. And then season 2 came out, and I'm like, this written by the same people, because it looked like it was written by committee, and it didn't work. And now season 3 came out, and I like watched half an episode, and I'm like, I just can't. So
Didn't they say the same thing about the final season of Game of Thrones? Like there was too many people involved. Like they stretched it so far. It was like, oh, it lost something.
it did. It did. It really. But then when you go back in Game of Thrones, it's a great example to an episode like Battle of the Bastards. You could tell whoever was in charge of that one loves, medieval armor, arms, battle scenes, because it was, and Bill, please don't hate me for this. It is possibly one of the best fantasy scenes I have ever seen filmed, surpassing a lot of the stuff you see in any of the Lord of the Rings stuff. That Battle of the Bastards episode was just amazing to me. Maybe a couple of things in Two Towers, but it was possibly one of the best things I've ever seen in recorded in the fantasy genre. But again, I think you put an artist in charge of it, not like this, oh, let's, run by committee kind of crap that goes on. It's like there was one James Bond movie that came out a number of years ago that Spectre, I think it was called, that had 3 writers that hated each other and they could never be in the same room together. So you wind up with this disjointed crap movie. And if you try to watch Spectre, you're like, what the hell is this crap? It's anyway.
It's disjointed.
It's disjointed a bit. But yeah, anyway, I think that's the difference is we can have all the tools in the world we want, but if you don't put artists and artistic vision in charge, you wind up with a mess of crap, and it doesn't quite come out the same. And that was all I wanted to talk about today. So I could talk for over 3 hours because that's the way I work. But Bill does the same thing. It's like, we say goodbye, and then 2 hours later we're like, hey, you want to coat?
It's a Southern goodbye. Well, 3 hours later.
I thought it was called the Midwest goodbye. It's the Midwest goodbye that never ends.
I think it's probably every region except for maybe the Pacific Northwest. I don't know.
Not in Boston, man. We say goodbye. It's like, get the hell out, man. I live there. New England is a lot different world, man.
Yes, as far as I hear.
Yeah, I have moved away from New England, and I might be departing again for a different part of the South. But it's like I'm 99% certain I'm departing for a different part of the South. That's not exactly public information yet, although I just put it on my YouTube channel, so I guess
you just told your 10,000 plus subscribers, Tim.
No, I don't think I've kept that. My kids know, so I don't think that's kept that secret very well. And when the kids know, everybody knows because they can't stay quiet. They're teenagers. It just anyway. They do think I'm a dork, but that's okay. Anyway, so that's kind of
my
what I want to
favorite
talk
people
about.
are dorks. Hey,
that's kind of what I wanted to get to, is that the people that are like, hey, we got to go back to hand drawn. I don't think you understand the economics of how these things work, right? You've got to put the artist in charge, and then let the artist pick the tools they want to use and produce whatever it is they're going to produce. But there's a difference between an artist and like a content generator, which is what I would call myself. There's a difference between an artist and somebody who runs by a spreadsheet, right? Those are not remotely close to the same thing. Like, Walt and his brother, one was clearly the guy who knew art and knew what he wanted. He wasn't a great artist, but he at least understood it. He could draw Mickey, and he worked on some of the early animations, but he wasn't, iWorks was a much better artist. And so were some of the others. And I think he knew that, but he had that vision. He had that great vision, and he could help people bring it to life and kind of bring it out of his team. But his brother certainly didn't. His brother knew how to get money from banks and kind of make it so that the company didn't go out of business. And then when the Disneys quit running it and Bob Iger took over, Bob made sure that company isn't ever going out of business, because you might discredit some of what they've done over the years, but they have definitely never been in financial trouble again, like ever. And nope. They are as solid as they're ever going to be. So and I think they've produced some great stuff. They've also produced some content oriented things, but they have, they're not trying to produce two or three movies a year, which is what Walt was trying to do. They're trying to produce a streaming series a week, right? It's a much different kind of company now. So I think they do sort of that tier A, and then they have that tier B content that you kind of have to produce when you're trying to put that much stuff out constantly. So, and I think there's a difference between them. So anyway, that's my take, is you put the artists in charge and let them pick whatever tools that they want. Don't put me in charge, because I'm just a tech guy. I'll make the tools work all day long for the artist, but if you want me to be the artist, that's not my job.
Well, isn't there also the triangle? You can have a job done cheap, good, or fast, but you can only pick two.
That's true.
So it's like you can have fast animation, but you're going to be missing some pieces. It's not going to be the real good work.
Oh, did I just... All right, sir.
South Park.
South Park. Gonna look like South Park. They embrace it.
Yes, that's a whole nother animal unto itself. That's they're doing it raw style. Yes.
I think you could
And
do some
since
of those
then they have
episodes with like a package of construction paper and a camera. I mean, it's
that's how it began, I believe,
Yes,
actually.
that is exactly how it began.
Yeah.
Construction paper and a camera. They
Yeah.
they moved over to uh, Avid Pro Tools on an SGI when they could afford it, but it is
That's it.
done in the same style. So
Hmm. Yeah. It's amazing. And it's
it's-
due to limitations as well, that inspiration, because what do you have around you? What can I use?
but
yep.
again, it's art versus, not art, right? They were limited,
Hmm.
but they were kind of artistic in the way that they were just kind of do a Mel Brooks where they pick on everybody instead of just one or two people. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's the genius of South Park is like there are no sacred cows, right? There's no, oh, I'm not going to pick on that group; they're off limits. So like, nope, going after everybody. All right, it's like Blazing Saddles. What's the old joke? It's like, oh, the edited for TV version of Blazing Saddles is on from 8 to 8:03.
That's about it.
Yeah, I had a parent teacher conference once because my son quoted Blazing Saddles in sixth grade.
Oh.
Oh,
So
which part?
yeah, they were learning about a particular time in history that's not great. And when the teacher walked by, my lily white redheaded son, he looked right at him and said, "Where are the white women at?" And the teacher started laughing so hard he could not actually explain to the rest of the class what was funny, so I got in trouble for it.
What's the one thing I do know about that movie that I want to leave people with, if anybody's still watching, is that movie was co-written or partially written by Richard Pryor, and there was some discussion
Yeah.
about whether Richard Pryor should play the sheriff, and even
Hmm.
Richard Pryor was like, "Dude, I think I might, put this over the edge if people don't like this." So they got Cleveland Little, they got some
Also,
other people involved, and
also the
it went.
studio wouldn't insure Richard Pryor's
That's
appearance
what I was gonna
because of,
say.
That was probably it, right? And
yeah,
but there were apparently a
issues.
couple of times when even Richard Pryor was looking at Mel Brooks going, "Are you sure you want to do that?" So, and Mel Brooks like, "Yep, we're doing it. Let's go." But when you got Richard Pryor looking at you going, "Dude, seriously?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
okay?"
It's impressive. It's very impressive.
Oh yeah.
That's like a career goal is to have somebody like that look at me and go, "Are you sure you want to do that?"
It's-
All
Or him
right.
and fighting with Gene Wilder over different things, seeing if he's committed enough to fight about something to have it still in a movie. Some of those stories are pretty awesome as well.
Yeah, because they
yes.
started off with somebody else playing his
Uh,
role.
Hmm.
they started off with and I have gone blank 5 minutes ago. I could have told you the person they were going to have play the sheriff is Gene Wilder's character is a drunk, and so they got this old cowboy actor, and I can't remember his name. Somebody in the comments is going to blow up at me over this, I know. But he was fairly well known, and he showed up on set, and they're like, "Hey man, you're really selling it. This is fantastic. This is great." And they got ready for the first day of shooting, and they were like, "Where is he?" And he was passed out drunk. It turns out he was an out of control alcoholic. He wasn't
Yeah.
selling the idea of the kid as the poor guy was an actual uh just complete uncontrollable drunk, and when they gave him his film advance, he proceeded to consume all of it.
Yep.
And then of course Mel Brooks calls up Gene Wilder and he's like, "You want to be in a cowboy movie, please, now?"
That
Like today.
that was Mel Brooks's year, right? Because he had that and Young Frankenstein in the same year. And
Oh,
I mean, it was 1974, 76. I mean, I don't remember. It might have been 78, but somewhere in the
74.
70s was
It was
74.
early 70s.
Yeah, it was just Mel Brooks's year, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that and Young Frankenstein, which honestly, to this day, I will watch that occasionally and crack up because again, it's like I was saying about animation, it's art versus not art, right? Who else would have thought, Abby Normal? Well, it's Abby Normal, right?
Yeah.
It's like you mean
like not in the Ritz.
I put an abnormal brain into a 7 foot tall.
Gorilla.
Yes.
How about
Yep.
Hackman? Wait,
Oh,
where are you
man.
going? I was going to make espresso.
Express.
I did not
You know
realize
what?
that was Gene Hackman until like Gene
Yes.
Hackman died. Okay. And somebody was like, oh, he's in
Oh,
Young Frankenstein. I'm like, no way.
Yeah.
I had to look it up. I'm like,
yeah.
oh, that was
None
him.
of those lines were written either. He made them up as he went along. Like he wasn't even supposed to be there. He was just kind of called in, and
Yep.
he's not even in the credits.
Yep.
I, you know, he is who he is, right? He knocked it out. And we're and personally, and I think this is kind of an interesting spot we're at in history. We're losing a lot of the greats, right? So some of the early animation greats are kind of all gone. There's one or two left around, but they're in their 90s and not working anymore. Some of the
Hmm.
guys from the early 80s, late 80s, early 90s at Disney are not coming back out of retirement, but they're in their 70s and they're kind of like, yeah, I'm just going to help direct. I'm not going to really do much. And we're losing a lot of the greats, right? We're losing a lot of the Mel Brookses. We're losing a lot of the people who we look at and go, and Gene Hackman we lost, but just early this year, late last year, or somewhere in that range.
Hmm.
Wasn't that long ago.
The people I think
No.
of as young actors are not spring chickens. I see Brad Pitt and I'm like, yeah, that young guy. He's 61.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I
Yep.
think you go back and watch Ocean's 11 and you got, what's his name going, you think I'm 50? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, pretty much just from the
Hmm.
neck up. So, but we're losing a lot of the greats. And I think I'm glad, I'm hoping that we can kind of continue some of those traditions of art in this instead of just content. And I think sometimes this is where I think as a fan base, we kind of ride it off the rails where we're like, oh, you don't have enough views, you don't have enough this, you don't have enough that. Well, it's like that's not really, social media views don't really have much to do with it. It's let's produce something that's real, not just a social media content type of system. And that's not how you gauge success, right? Because I think we've kind of gotten bent around too much of views and likes and what really matters versus trying to produce something that's going to have that lasting power. Because here we are 50 years later talking about Blazing Saddles, and everybody's like, you know, who can't picture when the lights go off and she's like, oh, it's Twoo, it's Twoo. I mean, come on. You say that to anybody in Gen X or the millennial crowd, they all know exactly what you're talking about instantaneously. All right.
Oh.
But the other thing about it though is like I watch a lot of shows with my kids and sometimes I'll try to watch them first because I have teenagers and they're going to see things. But if they watch it with me, they get highly uncomfortable. And now,
Hmm.
that scene in that movie would have been done much differently with the lights on or whatever. And he did it with lights off. It was a joke that landed. It landed well. It landed artistically. And here, half a century later, we're still like, okay, that's freaking funny. Right. But as the stuff, that you see now where they would have just done that much differently, you're like, okay, that wouldn't be nearly as funny anymore. Right. It would have
Hmm.
been much, much different. And so you have the artist running the thing instead of, somebody producing content, which is what I would do. Right. And that's why I don't make movies for a living. I make software.
What to leave to the imagination and what not to.
Exactly. That's the important.
It's always scarier if the monster is not visible.
Well, I mean, you think about Jaws, right? One of the horror
Hmm.
was you didn't see Jaws till 2/3 of the way through the film. You
Yeah,
followed.
it was the buildup of this scary creature. Yeah,
Yeah.
the imagination does so much worse than we could ever put down on paper.
And like you said earlier, it was based on the fact that they couldn't afford to put Jaws in the film any sooner because the special effects were too much. So they were like, "All right, we're driven by price here, man. Let's just do it." So anyway, all right, I think we should leave it at that because we're not even talking about animation anymore. But thank you guys for coming by, and I'll get this up sometime today and send you links to it. But I appreciate everybody. Bill, thank you again. Maggie,
You're very welcome.
always a pleasure. Love having your viewpoint because it's completely different than mine. And I do expect some pictures of a coyote and a roadrunner at some point to show up on your Twitter feed so I can see what they are.
Absolutely will.
So, to see if the quest actually is still going on or not. But anyway, I appreciate everybody. Any last words? Peace out.
Have a wonderful time. Lovely to be here. Lovely to meet you.
Nice to
Cool.
meet you too, Maggie.